This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I have a dear friend and a beautiful, beautiful soul, Firas Al Mubayad, who is a passionate advocate for deaf education and rights, dedicated to bridging the gap between hearing and deaf communities. As a licensed British Sign Language (BSL) teacher and co-founder of AMB Deaf Accessibility, Firas delivers bespoke BSL training packages, consultancy services, and cultural guidance to empower individuals and organizations. With a mission to foster inclusivity and highlight the challenges faced by the deaf community, Firas works tirelessly to create a more accessible world for all. And I also have with us Jill Blackadder, who is a qualified and registered BSL British Sign Language and English entrepreneur and interpreter. I've been working as a BSL interpreter since 2015 before she used to teach English. Welcome to both Firas and Jill. I really appreciate you guys being here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you. Well, just as a little bit of background for the listeners, Firas and I are dear friends from back home, and we are connecting again after a little bit of a hiatus and separation. But just as well, some exciting things have been taking place with Firas and what he's developing. So I'm really excited to dive in and learn more about all that he's doing. So what I typically do with all of my guests is take a step back to learn about why and where they came from into starting their business. So Firas, I leave that to you to tell us a little bit about the history.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to start with a huge thanks to you, Sasha, for inviting me onto the podcast. I was quite shocked. I can remember when we first got to know each other back in Syria. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you. So as you say, my name is Firas Al Mubayad. I'm from Syria. My family are Syrian. When I was born, I was actually born in Kuwait, and so I grew up in Kuwait and became deaf at age 2. My family were very shocked. It was the first experience they ever had with a deaf anybody. They'd never had anybody deaf in their family before, and so they really put a brave face on and tried to make the best out of it. But unfortunately, the attitude at the time in Kuwait was really very negative. Deafness was seen as a barrier, that there was no future. And so there was never really a really good opportunity for good education. My family didn't accept this and spent a lot of time and energy researching what opportunities I might have somewhere else. And so aged 9, my father realized that really I had no future in Kuwait. As a deaf child, education was very difficult. There was no language, no access to education. So despite having a really wonderful, very supportive family, it was very difficult to communicate with friends, family, and society in general, whose attitude towards deafness was really quite discriminatory. That was regarded as something very difficult to overcome, and people weren't very interested in doing so. So, age 9, my father made the very difficult decision to send me to the UK for my schooling and education. And obviously, this is a very difficult thing as a mother and father to accept. So, I know that my father found it very difficult. My father didn't have any spoken English, and so with his brother, my uncle, the 3 of us came to the UK. My uncle spoke English. It was a real shock for all 3 of us. It was really cold. Everybody looked very different. Everybody was very pale and very white. Food was different. The smells were different. It was a huge culture shock. So at that time, London was a very, very big, noisy place. And so I had no concept of where we were and what was going on. So he had a big map that he showed me on the map where Kuwait was, where Syria was, where London was. It's very difficult for me to understand that he was going to leave me behind. A school named Hamilton Lodge was the only school that accepted me. Most of the schools in the UK said no, because I had absolutely no English, zero English. And so they couldn't quite work out how I would learn, how they would be able to communicate with me. I'm very grateful Hamilton Lodge accepted the challenge, and so I became a boarder there. But I still didn't quite understand what that meant for me, that my dad would be flying back to Kuwait without me.
Yeah.
And so again, we had to spend some time communicating about how this might be, and the fact that he would be away for a very long time. He left, and I found this very emotionally difficult. I had a very hard time. He had to come back to explain to me what it was that was going to happen. So he had a metaphor that he used, where it would be like using a hammer to educate me. Back in Kuwait, you could stay, you can wake up, people can tease you, you can have a very, very sheltered and very small world life, or you can stay here. You can learn sign language, you can make friends, you can learn things about the world. And obviously in that case, I was able to say, yes, I'm going to stay here. But obviously what you're doing is making the decision to stay away from your family, but we'll be able to travel and bring you back home to be able to see your friends and family. So I accepted this, but it was a very, very difficult time for me. However, I did carry on with my education. I used BSL, British Sign Language, and so the teachers were able to teach me using pictures, for example, of an apple, what that might be spelled like in English, what the sign was in BSL, and very, very slowly even being able to develop a little bit of a spoken voice. I think, for the hearing world, who are very obsessed with sound and audio, being able to use your voice in some way is very, very useful as a deaf person. So I came to Brighton, I studied at Hamilton Lodge, and then eventually moved to Preston, where I did some more education. And after I completed my education in Derby, I then moved back to Kuwait, because I was ready to take over the business from my father. He was going to teach me how to become a businessman and how to take over. It doesn't matter that a deaf person is taking over the business. My father really believed in me, knew that I could do it. So I trained, but at the same time realized that I didn't have the same kind of social life that I had back in the UK. So working with my dad was absolutely great, but the social attitudes towards deafness were still very patronizing and very limiting. And this was quite a challenge for me, because having grown up essentially in the UK, where people saw deaf people as capable, that I knew that I had futures, I made the very difficult decision to come back to the UK, and agreed with my father to think about what it was that I might want to study in the UK. And so I decided to study fashion design. My dad had his own business selling textiles and fabric in the Kuwait, which was very successful. And I thought if I studied fashion design and tailoring, that would be the perfect link. My dad agreed. And so I came back to the UK, applied to very many different universities, who all rejected me. However, one, again, like my original education, there was one in Liverpool who said, yes, we'd be able to take you. And although I wasn't keen on Liverpool, my dad said, look, any university that's going to take you, this is a great thing. So I said yes, and I joined the university, I joined this course. And I think being able to show that my skill in design and fashion really gave me the confidence to continue and to show everybody that I could do it. So I studied there for 4 years. But at Johns Hopkins University in Liverpool, I became the first deaf graduate. And so I have to say, thanks to my father for paying for my education, for paying the tuition fees, for paying my interpreter, for paying my accommodation. He paid for everything out of his own pocket. He knew that this was the best thing for me. So I always had that in the back of my mind. It really motivated me to work hard. And when I eventually qualified and got my degree, I thought of all those times in my life where I thought I can't do things. And really, this degree was able to prove to me, to my father, to everybody that deaf people can do things. My dad said, look, it's better if you stay after you're qualified. Don't come straight back. What you need to do is develop a network, stay in the UK, get a job. And so he was right. I stayed. And so I worked on Savile Row, which I think everybody knows is one of the most famous names associated with fashion design. And so I got a job working there for a year. It was a very small opportunity, but it really opened many, many doors for me. So just as I was about to move to a new job, unfortunately, my father passed away. And I was absolutely heartbroken. I was really angry. This was such a big break for me. It was, my dad had spent all of this time and passion and focus on me, and I had no idea that he was ill. He'd kept that from me because he knew that I would stay to carry on with my work in this way. So what happened was, once my father passed away, I knew that I had to commit to supporting my younger brother, Wael, who is also deaf. And so for me, as a perfect role model, as also deaf, somebody who had managed to achieve all of this, of course I said yes. So I can remember in Preston, when I was 12 years old, one of the teachers came to me and said, congratulations, you have another brother. And I said, oh my goodness, I've got a boy, another boy. I feel sorry for my mum and dad because now they have 5 boys. My poor mum. But, 5 boys, actually that's a blessing because they're going to look after everybody. I asked the teacher what my new brother's name was, and they told me it was Wael and that he was like me. And I said, well, what do you mean like me? And they said, well, he's deaf as well. And at that point, I was so angry. I thought at that time, I still thought very negatively about my experience as being deaf. And so I was, again, very emotionally upset, very angry. My father actually flew over at the time to say, what's going on? Why are you angry? And had a really wonderful conversation with me where he was able to say, look, you have 3 brothers who are hearing and you were the only deaf one. And now you have a brother who is deaf. So there's 3 brothers who are hearing and 2 brothers who are deaf. My dad had just such a great way of being able to always see the positive in things. And he was absolutely right. He changed my perspective. And so when my dad did pass away, I brought Wael over in 1994, which is when my dad passed away. Wael came over and I took on responsibility for him. I was only 21, so I was a very young big brother, but I had to take on the responsibility of getting him into school and paying for his education, making sure that he could learn a bit of British Sign Language. I had to pick the school that he went to, and he has also managed to achieve a degree. And so this experience led then on to 2006, where I started thinking about what I'd left behind and what my experience was like as a deaf person in the UK compared to what a deaf person's experience in Syria was. And I spoke to my mum about, what I had achieved and what I had managed to access in the UK. My mum encouraged me to go back to Syria and investigate what opportunities there were for deaf people in Syria. And unfortunately, this is where I realised that, again, the attitudes I'd experienced in Kuwait were prevalent in Syria as well, where people were very dismissive. They hid deaf people away. They didn't see a future for deaf people. So those attitudes around deafness and disability were, very, very, traditional in that respect. And so, being able to go to Syria and being able to meet people and take them to visit schools and realize just how little opportunity they had compared to what I'd experienced. They had no books, they had no education, they had no resources. People who were deaf were not regarded as worth investing in. It was just heartbreaking to me that for me, 12 years of education were completely lost to these children. So I came away from the UK and moved back to Syria to be able to set up something, to be able to promote education for deaf children. And I had to learn to be very resilient before I moved back, I had people say to me, please don't think about, bringing English. We have to think about Syrian. We have to think about being Syrian there. And so for me, it was another big culture shock. So I spent 2 years unlearning all the things I'd learned in the UK and relearning all my Arabic, Syrian roots in terms of Syrian culture. My attitude around bringing what I'd learned in the UK and being able to embed it in Syria really was the wrong way round. I had to really think about what it was that Syrian people needed, deaf Syrian people, for deaf education in Syria. So I was there for 7 months, traveling around Syria in various different, I was in Homs, I was in Damascus, I was in various different places for 7 months, just heartbreaking, seeing what deprivation existed for deaf people in Syria. And so I had 2 interpreters from the UK who supported me, who volunteered their time to write applications and contact people in Syria about establishing some sort of support centre or some sort of education for deaf children. Then at that time, I was very lucky that a very famous Canadian pop singer called Bryan Adams, who happened to be in Syria at the same time, was invited to perform a concert. And I sent a proposal to him to say, would you really like to join with myself and my brother to be able to do something for deaf education and disability education in Syria? And so he came to Syria, came to Damascus and did a concert. And I had never expected anything on this scale, but we were able to raise $700,000 that we were able to raise that was going to go towards setting up a specialist school, specialist institution for deaf children. And as amazing as that was, what then happened was civil war broke out in Syria. And so we waited for 6 months thinking we can get this project off the ground. And then it became a year, and then it became 2 years. And we realized that everything stopped. America locked everything down. There was no way to access. There was no way to get the money in. There was no way to do anything in Syria. So this money that was there, it was all ready to go. We had all the plans. It was just, again, heartbreaking. Yeah. So I had to then leave Syria and move to Dubai. And I thought, well, maybe I can do something similar there, set something up in Dubai, specialist deaf education. Lots of meetings, lots of talking, lots of discussions for 5 years, realized that this wasn't going to work. I had friends talk to me and say, look, you're not getting anywhere here. Why don't you go back to the UK? Why don't you go back to the UK and set up something there? Set up a company that can promote deaf accessibility and deaf equality here. And that's what I did. Just before COVID hit, I had time to set up my company. I was then able to spend time with building a team of interpreters like Jill. I'm sorry, Jill's had so much work. We've spent a lot of time doing things. We've been setting up deaf accessibility. And really, for me, the passion is about going into companies, organizations, and promoting deaf awareness. So my experience when I worked in the UK before as a fashion designer, I had no problem. I was working at a very high level with lots of hearing people. But when I left working within these companies to set myself up as a freelancer, I realized that without those big names behind me, it was very, very difficult to break into companies, to be able to do things the right way. Being able to do simple things on a daily basis, like just go to the bank or buy a flat or do things like this. Deaf people would be asked to stand to one side while we call somebody over to deal with you, while hearing people were dealt with. And so the same things would happen when you go to a GP. You would find it very, very difficult to communicate with GPs. You'd be sitting in the waiting room. People would come out and call your name and not take account of the fact that you didn't hear you sitting in the waiting room. You'd be sitting there waiting, and then eventually you'd go to the front desk and they'd say, oh, we called your name and you didn't come forward. You're like, but I'm deaf. How did you expect me to hear? So just the daily experience of a deaf person in the UK is a very difficult one because people don't understand the small things that could be made more easy for us. And as a result, I see lots of my friends and colleagues and peers within the deaf community, which is very small, suffer very, very disproportionate high rates of mental health illness. There are lots of NGOs that exist who don't really achieve the things that I think they should be doing in terms of promoting deaf awareness. And when I accessed whether there was research, whether there was a specific company to do all of this, I realized there wasn't. So I set up my own company called Deaf Accessibility, and then sent out over 200 emails to different schools, because my view is that within schools, as young children, people on the curriculum study English and maths. They might be studying accounting. They might be studying foreign languages, history. All of these things are really important to understand culture, but there is no curriculum subject around deafness, around sign languages in the UK. And for me, this is a really, really easy way of resolving lots of these social issues that deaf people experience. So for me, it's about finding ways to navigate a system that isn't set up for deaf people and being able to find a few doors that would open to let me in. So I sent out 200 emails to various schools offering to teach BSL and deaf awareness, and had one reply to say, oh, yes, this sounds interesting. Whereas I think everybody else doesn't see it as important. I will always be grateful to Falcon's School in London, who were the first school to say, this sounds interesting, what can we do? And so I did a taster session for them for an hour where I went in with a group of children and I taught them the alphabet in BSL, taught them how to say very simple things like hi and how are you and what your name is. And the children were like sponges. Within the space of an hour, they were able to do the alphabet, they were able to sign, all these very simple things. And I think for a lot of hearing people who've never had this experience before, it's quite a moving, impactful experience. And they signed me up on the spot. And so from that very first initial contact, I now teach BSL and deaf awareness at 5 different private schools across London. I teach some of the parents. They come in to watch their children have lessons with me, and the parents really, really find this really powerful. They themselves find it very fascinating and start to learn some BSL themselves. Last year, there was a level 1 group. They started doing an actual accredited certificate. So this is some of, the littlest children in the school who are able to get the qualifications. And the idea that I always say to people is that if we teach children BSL and deaf awareness and what that means at this young age, when they leave school at 16 and go on to university, these are our future doctors, these are our future lawyers, accountants, that when they encounter deaf people in the real world out there, will already have that deaf awareness and BSL locked in. I started off by talking about my very first school that I attended in the UK, Hamilton Lodge, and very sadly, just in the last few weeks, it's been announced that this school's likely to close this year, which is heartbreaking because I can honestly say Hamilton Lodge saved my life. And because of what I learned there and the journey that it started me on, I am able to work as the bridge between the hearing and the deaf worlds.
Yeah. Wow, that was incredible. Like so much to unpack. I do have a question. At what age does a little child, or maybe it's not what age should a child who is born deaf begin British Sign Language?
really the evidence shows
Yeah.
that babies, whether deaf or hearing, can learn basic signs from the age of 6 months.
Okay.
So babies can learn sign language much, much earlier than they learn spoken language. So we should be teaching babies, deaf babies, BSL from the start. My niece was born hearing, but obviously has me as her uncle. And so I've been able to teach her as a baby the sign for milk and water and thank you. 3 simple little signs. And so when she was a baby, I taught her milk, water, and thank you. And she was able to communicate with me straight away. She was able to ask for milk. When I gave it to her, she was able to say thank you. And
Oh,
so I can remember a situation where she was crying and her mum was really lost. Like, why is she crying? I don't understand. And I was able to say, don't worry, I've got this. She wants some milk. Gave her the milk and she stopped. I mean, it was just astounding. And
yeah.
unfortunately, I think there is a lot of miseducation, misunderstanding out there about sign language. And the big mistake that the medical professional and governments make is that BSL and sign languages across the world are not taught, not only to deaf children, but to
Yes.
hearing children from an early age.
Yes. Because
Sign language is a beautiful language. It is visual. It is powerful. I think hearing people don't realize they don't have to rely on their voice all the time. There are other ways to do this.
yeah, no, that's very really beautifully well said. I mean, I can only imagine that. Even, I mean, because if you think about it, I mean, with animals, right? I mean, we're communicating to them, they hear, but they don't speak, right? So it's almost like, of course, they're animals, but at the same time, it's like the way that a human can communicate with you versus, having not learning to make the sound of words so early on, but being able to communicate to their parent what they want at a certain age. And 6 months is so young. I mean, kids don't learn how to speak until much later. So that's wild. That's fantastic.
It is a
Very
very, very
powerful.
powerful thing.
I agree. I agree. So we had the history of you coming to the UK, studying in the UK, and learning about your brother's deafness as well, who came to the UK. You basically became a father slash big brother at such a young early age, raising him in the way that you knew how, and then pushing through, honestly, with like worldly I mean, not disasters, just worldly instances of the civil war in Syria, with COVID happening and everything just, hitting at the peak of moments for growth. Tell me a little bit about AMB, deaf accessibility in terms of building that, because it's now post COVID and it's now the build up, and you've been established in the UK for X amount of years now. And so this is what you're truly focusing on.
Wow. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, there's an ops factor. Things like having good friends who've really encouraged me to do this. I think people who know you really, really well, they're able to say, look, we know that you can do this. So in 2019, I think I set up AMB. I became officially known as Deaf Accessibility. Must have been about 2019, 2020. But really that decision was made because friends had encouraged me to do this. I'd moved back to the UK after being in Kuwait and in Syria and Dubai for a while. And when I came back, I really noticed some of the barriers that I hadn't really noticed before. The government had changed, and so I think BSL was really dismissed. There was no, it was treated really poorly. It was, it wasn't really regarded as a language. People thought it was this really sort of robotic, fake thing. It's really, really difficult to explain to people that every country has their own sign language and that it's a natural language that's developed. So thinking about it for a while, I thought, okay, I really do need to do something about this. I think it's not just about my own experience, it's about my colleagues, my peers, my community. I think, being able to say, look, I've got a degree and I've got this qualification, and then you go to a job interview and people say, oh, but you're deaf. You can't do this. You can't have a job. We can't do this. To be able to say to somebody, no, I can, and you don't have to pay for the interpreter. In the UK, we have something called Access to Work, which is a government grant, which started after 1994. So before my time at university, there was none of this funding for interpreters at all. I had to pay for it myself. Dad paid for it for me. But being able to go for an interview and being able to say, look, Access to Work provides a grant, which means that you can pay for your interpreter support. And I think a lot of people don't know about this. So this is where deaf people have to go on a daily basis and say, no, you can give me the job. You don't have to pay for the interpreter. There's this thing called Access to Work. Please don't call me deaf dumb. Please don't, all of these things that people still labor under the misapprehension of, all of this history that's completely unknown. For example, in 1871 at the Milan Conference, 1880 it was, there was a big educational conference at which loads of teachers and hearing educators of deaf children decided that sign languages across the world should be banned. Deaf children should be taught how to lip read. We have to use what is called the oral method. Oh. There were 2 deaf people in attendance. The rest, over 120 people, were all hearing, and they made this decision to say deaf education has to be oral. You are not allowed to use signed language at all. And I'm just checking with Jill, it was Milan that it was. And so we have people, just as recently as maybe 10 years ago, apologizing for this decision, realizing the damage that it's done to deaf children, a host of deaf children who have been banished from using sign language, who've been abused, hit, told to sit in their hands, physically tortured in order to teach them how to sign, where people think lip reading is this magical skill, but 70% of it is guesswork. And so a lot of, there is a lot of discrimination and misapprehensions that we are having to undo 120 years later still. So finally in 2022, the UK government recognised BSL as an official language of the UK and said that for government and civil services, BSL has to be provided. Deaf people have the right to ask for an interpreter when they go to the dentist or to the doctor. So finally, in 2022, we have some sort of legal right and restitution to our to having access in our language. So I have spent a lot of time teaching the companies and organizations that have booked me all of this history, all of these facts and interesting things about deaf education. So I've been able to teach 5 schools. And then Nespresso booked me to teach one of their first teams of cafe baristas, how to sign things like, would you like a coffee? Would you like a large or small? Would you like oat milk? Would you like soy milk? And so I did a training session for them. Very excitingly, I can't say any more because I have signed a contract with them, but there are very exciting things to come with Nestle for the next year and a half where I will be teaching more staff. But, being able to see things out and about, like in the train stations or in the shops, you just want somebody, as a deaf person, you just want to see somebody acknowledge you as a deaf person and sign to you in your sign language. Yeah. I teach 5-year-olds who pick it up. I can't begin to tell you how quickly. And I think it's because they have no embarrassment. I think that age, they're just delighted to play all these games and do all these things. I think adults find it really, really difficult. Some of the children say to me, oh, you speak funny, you speak bad. And, I'm able to say to them, that's absolutely fine because I'm deaf. It's absolutely fine. So they're able to ask those awkward questions. They don't have any shame. They don't have any embarrassment. And they go, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And they carry on. The parents have just been astounded, I have to say it, how quickly their children have picked it up. So my aim is to see more of this education in schools, because again, this is how we get rid of these barriers. As a deaf person, I look back at my experience as a deaf person over the last 30 years. I do not want to see the same problems for the next 30 years. Yes, things are better, but I think we still need to see, things changing. My big worry is with the number of deaf schools that are closing. Deaf children are sent to mainstream schools, and my view, mainstream schooling, where you have maybe, I don't know, 8 deaf children with 200, 300 hearing children. They don't have a peer group. They don't have the same experience as the mainstream hearing peers. Whereas if they go to a deaf school, all of their peers are just like them. They can be taught in the language that they understand. They can be taught maths, English, science in BSL. They can communicate with each other. They have rich lives. I think at the moment, we had maybe 97 deaf schools in the UK. I think now there's under 20. And even less now that Hamilton Lodge looks likely to close. So teaching BSL and deaf awareness in hearing mainstream schools is great, but at the same time, I would like the government to see how powerful this is and to invest in keeping the specialist deaf schools going as well.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, I'm excited to hear what's going to come out of Nestle. And, I think that you in England might be a world's way ahead of what's happening in the US. But it seems like from a twofold standpoint, you're supporting individuals and really the beginning of nurturing BSL from a childhood, young infancy stage to above. And then you're also championing the concept of incorporating more accessibility for the deaf society, in places like coffee shops, train stations, so on and so forth. Do you find that your work has been easier with like larger institutions like a Nestle to be able to get into and make a change versus doing it from an educational standpoint from the beginning up? So really my question is, do you find that it's harder to get in to support the children's growth of learning BSL, or do you think that it's easier to fix the problem that we have now? Like people are more easier to say, okay, come into Nestle, we'll support what is currently happening versus actually supporting people that are being born deaf and going to grow into a society that has a lack of?
Gosh, that's a really hard question to answer. I think both of them, to be honest, have been really tricky to achieve.
Yes.
The schools have been a really big challenge. I think, BSL win schools is possible, but there is a lot of encouraging and negotiating that needs to happen before that takes place.
Not to interrupt, but is it because the schools are like government based and it's harder to get into like government and make a change versus a private sector like a Nestle? Yes.
Oh, money is always going to be the overriding thing. So the mainstream schools, the state schools here in the UK have said no, because they cannot afford it. So for me, the private schools, because they have the money and the parents are able to afford these clubs, BSL clubs, and the schools have been able to incorporate all of these extracurricular things. This is the parents have seen how much their children are enjoying it. I think over, the 3 years that I've been teaching, there's over 1,000 children that have learned that. And my aim is to be able to show the state school sector the successes that we've achieved, to be able to institute it in mainstream schools. I'm very lucky. My local MP, Sarah Olney, has been so receptive to this. I sent her several emails. I invited her to come and watch me teaching. She did. She called another MP on the back of this. And so there's 5 MPs within her political party who also went to Parliament and campaigned for the BSL Act and campaigned to have BSL included in the curriculum because they've seen firsthand what we do in schools. So you're right, the mainstream schools, I haven't quite cracked that nut yet, and that's funding. But I'm hoping that with the evidence that I have, the BSL group that's been set up that has 22 members that works in conjunction with Parliament, we're hoping that we will be being able to feed into that. The BSL GCSE, so the sort of 16-year-old qualification that happens here in the UK is supposed to come in 2025. Fortunately, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Wales has decided that they won't be able to launch BSL in Wales. It will happen in England. There is a campaign underway to get that reinstituted in Wales. So things are happening, but I have managed to achieve my success within the private sector in education, not the public sector.
Yeah. And just to take a step back, because you did mention the case of being able to show the success of how your programs are working. How do you actually show success? Like how are you presenting the success piece of it?
I mean, really, I don't think anything works anywhere near as powerfully as seeing it in action yourself.
Got it.
So we have things like Sign Language Awareness Week or Deaf Awareness Week in May, April. And so being able to invite people into the classroom to see it in action, that is always going to work the best. So my MP, when she came in, she was just bowled over by what she saw. She realised from seeing our interaction, it's so much easier for deaf people, for hearing people to really suddenly take on board. Oh, I get what you're saying about how difficult this is for deaf people. It's really difficult. So you have companies like, maybe you sign up with a bank and then their automated system ends up calling you and you receive thousands of phone calls from these big faceless bureaucracies. And when you get in touch with them and you say, why are you calling me? I'm deaf. This is really frustrating. So explaining things like that to Sarah was really mind-blowing for her. She was like, oh yeah, I get it now. Because she'd seen me in action, because she saw how the children had been having that conversation with me. It was really a powerful experience for her. I'm really grateful to Sarah. She is such a supportive MP for my area. She has really supported me in many of the things that I do. So thanks to her, there's a lot of things that I've been able to achieve because I have emailed people to say, this is a problem, and I've CC'd her in. And suddenly things happen. The minute my MP steps in, things happen. The name of the MP opens doors. She mentioned my name in Parliament, to be able to talk about my issues as her constituent, to be able to say that her constituent had had this terrible experience with the bank. As I've always said to her, I can't speak. People don't listen to me because I don't have a voice. I have a voice, but people don't understand it. But people will listen to you. You will be my voice. That was a really powerful thing for her. And I am so grateful to her and her team for the support that they have given me. So, we have another example I'm thinking are about 1,200 registered interpreters in the UK.
Okay.
Now, in the UK, we have about 150,000 to 300,000 BSL users in the UK. And we have to book 1,200 interpreters. So, sometimes you think, all right, I've got to book an appointment, and the GP will say to you, you've got to wait 6 weeks because we can't get an interpreter. So, our physical health are put at risk because of the situation. We know that deaf people are expensive. We know that it is expensive to have to pay for an interpreter so we can access these services. But that is our right, and that is what our government should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so what are you looking to? I know that you're passionate about both sides, the private and the public sector. Um, and as my mind is going, obviously from a marketing standpoint, have you developed a platform whereby it's an ongoing community of whether it's parents that are checking in for their kids or just, really establishing a community in the UK of like, the deaf society being able to like check in, and that's where you'll also be able to measure data, right? So
It's a really good question. I think it's a very difficult thing for me to do. As a subject, everybody knows about English, everybody knows about art, but BSL people sometimes don't even know what it is.
yeah,
Promoting it is really, really difficult because I've got some fantastic photographs and video footage of me working with the children, but I have to be really careful of their privacy.
yes,
And so the legislation around what I'm allowed to put on my websites or promote on my social media platforms is really restricted.
yeah,
So it's very difficult to get people from the outside to see what's going on inside the school or inside my classroom. Because I think if people could see that, that's how I get them on board.
yeah,
And so I was very lucky that the schools have agreed, for example, for my MP to come into the classroom and see things in action firsthand, to be able to participate in some of the deaf awareness around, what jargon is appropriate and what cochlear implants actually mean. And so I was able to invite the parents in. The parents have then been the sort of, have really supported me in that regard. Once they've seen me in action, we were able to request their permission and their consent to be able to post videos and photographs online of children in action doing these sorts of things. So I'm very grateful to those parents who did allow me to use the images of their children in schools, and to the school as well for allowing me to promote this. But it's a very tiring thing to be able to have to explain it over and over again. So I'm, being able to record things and
mhm,
promote. BSL is a visual language. It's the only way that I can do it is
yeah,
to show it in action. But it comes with a lot of tricky legal things that I have to be very aware of.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think perseverance is your word, in terms of everything that you continue and to push through with, and you're nonstop of just the continuation. And I think anyone listening to this podcast, I don't care what kind of entrepreneur you are, whatever industry you're in, it's understanding and knowing that there will always be roadblocks and there will always be things that you will come across, but to just keep pushing forward to really get the result that you want to have. And I think this Nestle project is new because you didn't mention it last time we were speaking, and I'm very excited for this because it's changing and hopefully going to change the environment of the current situation, but then just to further continue what you're doing, for the newcomers, that because we're always going to have people that are born deaf. It's not something that's going to change, right? So it's really just pushing through. But my one question is, what has been the one thing that has kept you going?
I think it's my parents.
Oh my
The
gosh.
gratitude that I have for my parents, they never gave up on me.
Yeah.
You know, I think the passion for something, how you are able to adapt to it, that is the measure of the man. I
Yeah.
think having a role model like my parents really, really helped. Having my dad role model for me meant that I was able to role model for my brother. this has been the most important thing. You know, if people say no, you can find another way. You know, there are many, many doors. If that door closes, try another door, try
Yeah.
another door. Keep trying doors until you find the one that opens. And I think for me, that thing that you talk about that's kept me going has been my parents telling me never give up. You know,
Yeah.
thinking about the metaphor of a tree that falls over because it doesn't understand. You know, if you plant a tree, its roots are never going to quite be the same as when you plant the tree from the seed, because it's had that time to embed itself. It's had its time, to grow and experience the sun. And I think for me, it's the same thing. It's starting from something really, really small and being able to nurture it and grow with it organically. And I think, thanks to my parents, I just, I look at my experience and I worry for the future, honestly, because I think a lot of the medical community and hearing community see cochlear implantation as the solution.
Right.
That you have a cochlear implant and then problem is solved.
Yeah.
You'll never be deaf after that. They're
Yes.
really expensive. They cost a lot of money. They are really invasive medical procedures. And they think that once they've spent that money and that machine switches on, you are no longer deaf. And that is not true.
Yeah.
Cochlear implants help people to be able to hear. If you can, it might help you to speak, but it's just a tool, but it doesn't create an identity.
Yeah.
Doctors will say, oh, you can always turn it up, you can always adjust it. But I think it's not the same thing as giving a deaf child their real
Ability.
native language, which is a signed language.
Yeah.
With signed language, you have 100% access. With cochlear implantations, some of them fail, some of them are implanted and they still can't speak. And it's a waste of money. It's a really, really invasive medical procedure. And I think that a lot of people see it as a solution when it is a part of the solution. It's great. If people choose to have a cochlear implant, that's absolutely great. But I think what we need to remember is when we implant a child, it's not the only thing. We need to scaffold that identity, that life experience with sign language.
Yeah.
I think a doctor thinks about that medical model, about just fixing the hearing problem, whereas we need to be thinking about, the social model. I think about words like, when a set of parents have a baby and they are told that their child is deaf, the first words that they hear are, "We're really sorry, your child is deaf." This isn't the way to start that relationship with this baby. It should be bringing in somebody deaf who's a role model to say, your child is deaf and look at what they could become, for example. And so I think it's shifting attitudes.
Very much so. I mean, I think that's with everything in life. Wow. I mean, that's a motto for everything in life, honestly, So, wow, Firas, this has been so insightful. I'm so excited for your journey and the continuation of everything that you're doing. I want to ask, like, what advice can you give to somebody who is, setting out to do something on a business? Because I feel like really perseverance is your word, and it's like, what advice do you have for somebody who is, wanting to do something and to start their own business? What would you tell them?
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Pick the right people to support you. You need time. Give yourself time to find your way through your journey.
Yes.
I think, if you have a swimming pool that has no water in it,
Yes.
how are you going to get through things? You need to think, or chicken or egg scenario. You've got to go back to the start, make sure that you've got the water, then find the pool. So think things through logically, find what it is that you want to sell. I think that perseverance as well around work. You never know what's going to happen. But even deaf people, we can set up businesses. If we can do it, and it's something that really perseverance and never giving up.
Yeah.
I think the attitude in society is that deaf people can't. And a lot of the times deaf people are not able to do things, but not because deaf people can't, but because society disables them.
Yes.
They put barriers in the way.
Yes.
So we're thinking about what it is that you do on a daily basis. I think what I would implore any potential new business to think about accessibility. For every 6 hearing people, there's 1 deaf person. Give those deaf people a chance. Make sure your company is accessible to us. So thinking about the whole of society, because I think if everybody benefits, if deaf people benefit, everybody benefits.
Yeah.
I think about my uncle, who at a much older age has started to lose his hearing. And I've said, good, it's great. And he said, I really have such a great understanding of it now. I remember when you were younger and I used to see you sign, I used to think, what are you doing? But now I realize just how important it is. Now that I lose my hearing, I start to think about how society, which fixates on these 2 little things on the side of our head. There are many, many other senses. There are many, many other ways that we can communicate. So I think it's about, widening your horizons.
Widening your horizon. Well, this has been fantastic. I could stay on forever. But I will link your website down below. So yes, tell everybody how we can find it. What is it? www.amb.
Oh, Firas froze there for me. All right, so it's deafaccessibility.com.
Okay, perfect. And for all the listeners, just as a reminder, we've had Jill on as Firas's English interpreter, and Firas has been muted this whole time, but I would love for him to come on and just say hello to everybody. So the floor is yours, Firas.
Hello, it's me, Borak. Nice to meet Borak. From Syria. I represent the diversity very much. It's very nice to be with you.
Thank you so much, Firas. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Sasha, was that okay? Do you need me to repeat anything? Was that fine,
No,
clear? You're happy?
Yes, I'm very happy. Perfect.
بعرف عربي
Yeah.
شو اسمع
Sasha.
انت بيوي
Say that again.
انت بيوي
What does he mean by that?
where you from?
Oh, from Syria.
We moved that.
Syria.
Arabic, quick.
Thank you so much, Firas.
Thank you too much.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
And let's stay in touch. And I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the good news that's coming.